The sun had already begun its slow descent, casting a low amber haze over the dry brush that ringed the southern edge of the ranger camp. It was a quiet hour, the kind where shadows stretched long and the heat began to lift off the ground like breath released. A few birds clung to the high branches, their wings still. Somewhere in the distance an acacia cracked as something passed by. But the camp stayed still. Then came the sound. Not sharp, not sudden, just a brittle snap of brush, followed by the dragging scrape of weight against earth. At first, the rangers thought it might have been the wind again. It often mimicked footsteps. But when the sound repeated, closer this time, deliberate and staggered, a few turned toward the fence line. One of them stood slowly. Another set down their tin cup without a word. Eyes narrowed. No one reached for weapons. There was no fear in it. Just something strange. Something out of rhythm. The movement came from the thinned part of the tree line where the old well path cut through. Overgrown now, used mostly by birds and antelope. The branches there parted softly, not as they would with force, but like something was leaning through them. And then he emerged. Small for his kind, ribs visible under the dust-caked skin, the calf stepped unevenly onto the clearing's edge. His ears hung low, one twitching faintly. His left foreleg barely held weight, bending slightly inward with every step. Flies clung to the folds near his eyes. He was alone. No trumpet announced his arrival. No herd flanked him. He made no sound at all. He simply crossed the outer dust circle of the camp as if his body had decided, gently and without protest, that this was the place he needed to fall. One ranger whispered, "He's just a baby." The others didn't speak. They didn't move quickly either. Years of training had taught them what panic cost. Instead, they shifted slowly from their resting places and approached with calm, curved steps, giving him distance, letting him see them, letting him decide. The calf stopped, breathing hard now. His body swayed gently where he stood. There was no sign of blood, but something in the way he carried his weight told them he'd been walking for far too long, perhaps for days. His skin looked dry to the point of cracking, especially around the joints and lower belly. The tip of his trunk dragged slightly, as if he didn't have the strength to hold it up. And still, he stayed upright. One of the rangers, a woman who had handled orphans before, stepped forward with a folded cloth soaked in saline. She didn't speak right away, just waited until the calf's eyes met hers, heavy, glassed with dust, blinking slowly. "It's okay," she murmured. "Just stand still for me." He didn't run. He didn't back away. But he didn't move forward either. The ranger crouched low, palm open, the cloth resting lightly in her hand. Another placed a shallow bucket of water down at a distance, letting the scent carry. Minutes passed with no shift, and then, with a tremble barely visible, the calf moved. Not toward the bucket, but toward the ranger. His trunk reached, not high, not curious, but low and tentative, brushing the edge of the cloth once before falling back to the ground. A soft sound escaped him. Not a cry, just breath released. That was enough. The others worked quickly but gently, no shouting, no sudden movements. They cleared a space near the shelter awning, laid clean padding down, and removed obstacles from his path. He was guided slowly, just by soft presence and space, until he sank at last into the shallow bedding. Not collapsed, just folded, like something that had been standing too long, waiting for permission to rest. The ranger placed her hand briefly against his side. His skin was warm but dry, his breaths shallow and uneven. A gentle rise, a hitch, then another breath. No blood, no swelling, but still something felt wrong. Not just tiredness, not just hunger. Something inside him had quieted. The night crept in without hurry. Lanterns were kept low. The camp shifted into hush. Flies were brushed off with twigs, and a wet cloth was laid across the calf's back to help regulate temperature. The bucket of water was moved closer. He didn't drink, but his trunk rested near it. Around him, life moved gently. Insects stirred in the dry grass. A jackal called faintly from beyond the ridge. The stars came out, indifferent and wide. No one spoke much after that. There was little to say. The calf had arrived with no name, no story, no trail behind him. But his presence said enough. The way he breathed, the way he hadn't cried, the way he'd walked straight to them, not with hope, but with a kind of soft resignation. Somewhere out in the bush, a herd might still be moving, or perhaps not. There was no way to know if he had been separated or left. In the end, the calf slept in the camp's light perimeter, his small body curled imperfectly, legs tucked close. One ear flicked now and then in dream or discomfort. His breathing slowed. The rangers watched from a distance, wrapped in their own silence, holding the weight of what they'd seen. Not just the arrival, but the way he had chosen stillness. Above them, the wind turned once, carrying a dry warmth across the plain. A few leaves shifted near the edge of the camp. The trees held their silence, and the little one slept. By morning, the heat had not yet returned, but the light had, soft and wide, brushing the earth in layers of gold and gray. The calf was still lying in the same shallow bedding, though his position had shifted. His head now rested flat against the ground, one eye half open, the other swollen with sleep or strain. His breath came in slow, rhythmic pulses, but each inhale felt heavier than the last. The ranger who had first crouched beside him was already kneeling again. Sponge in hand, dipping it into a bowl of warm water steeped lightly with minerals. She worked without rush, squeezing moisture over the calf's dry lips, then guiding a thin stream along the edge of his tongue. His trunk lifted once, instinctively, but fell again before reaching her hand. He wasn't resisting, but he wasn't fully responding either. She whispered, "Try again, little one." The calf blinked. Nearby, another ranger had begun examining the rest of his body more carefully. Not with gloved precision, but with a quiet, practiced eye. They didn't look for wounds alone. Sometimes the worst signs weren't visible at all. What they noticed first was the calf's reluctance to shift his weight. When his leg was gently coaxed outward, he gave a low, muffled exhale. Not a cry, not pain in its pure form, but discomfort held deep, the kind that didn't always surface. A vet was called from the nearby conservation post. Within the hour, a broad-shouldered man arrived with a canvas satchel slung over his back, his boots dusted from walking fast but not running. He knelt without speaking, set the bag down slowly, and let his hand rest near the calf's side, waiting, watching, feeling for rhythm. His first words, after nearly 10 minutes, were soft and even. "He's guarding something." No one asked what he meant. They knew. The vet worked gently, pressing the belly and watching for recoil. It came, a faint contraction of muscle near the right flank. The calf curled his legs tighter. His breath stuttered once. It wasn't external, not a break, not a tear, no blood. But inside, beneath the muscle and bone, something had shifted out of place. A deep bruise, maybe. A rupture. Possibly a cracked rib. The vet's brow furrowed as he leaned closer, listening again. Could have been a fall. Or something stepped on him. That suggestion lingered longer than it should have. Trampled? By accident? Left behind in a herd rush? Or, more darkly, pushed out? The calf made a low sound then. Not quite a trumpet, not a whine. Just a trembling call, soft and hollow that echoed into the silence. It came from his chest more than his throat, like a memory released without meaning to. He didn't lift his head. Just called once and fell still again. The camp grew even quieter. All morning the rangers kept vigil. Fluids were administered in careful amounts. A warm mash of soaked grain and crushed fruit was placed near the calf's head, but he made no move toward it. His energy was too thin. A ranger moved the food closer. After a long moment, his trunk twitched once and brushed the edge. Not enough to eat, just to know it was there. The vet stayed close, resting at intervals, listening with his hands more than tools. There was no need for sedation. The calf wasn't fighting. What concerned them more was the absence of the small signs. No reaching, no searching, no head lifting to scent the air. He had arrived with purpose, but now seemed to shrink inside himself, fading inward. They checked his skin again for scent markers, signs of herd contact. The older oils that usually lingered from flank rubs or trunk touches weren't there. No marks from mothers, no smudges from siblings. His scent was sharp, singular, and faintly sour from stress. "He's been alone longer than we thought," one ranger murmured. It made sense then. Why he'd come forward instead of hiding. Why he hadn't flinched at human hands. Why he'd walked into camp as if it were just another place to collapse. Whatever group he'd come from, if there had been one, was no longer near. By late afternoon, a shift began to occur. Not dramatic, just quieter. He took in more water. His trunk rested now in a looser curl, not tight with tension. His sides still rose unevenly, but the breath was steadier. At one point, when a fly landed near his eye, he lifted a leg, weakly but deliberately, to swat it away. It wasn't recovery, not yet, but it was movement. Still, the vet was cautious. If he doesn't stand by tomorrow, we'll have to lift him. He needs circulation. But the Rangers hesitated. It wasn't time to force anything, not when the calf had chosen this place himself. They believed he knew something about what he needed. Their job was simply to make space for it. The evening brought cooler air, a drift of dry petals across the open earth. The trees swayed gently above, casting long, broken shadows over the calf's body. The lanterns were lit again, low, amber-colored, placed at a respectful distance. One ranger sat beside him into the dusk, murmuring quiet things without meaning to fill the silence. "You've made it this far," she said. "Just a little more." The calf shifted once. His trunk brushed her boot. A small touch. Nothing more. That night, the camp held a kind of hush deeper than before, not of fear, but of fragile hope. No distant calls came, no crashing branches. The world outside the circle stayed still, as if waiting too, and the little one slept, his breath low and imperfect, but still rising. The third evening settled over the plains with an unusual stillness, the kind that made even seasoned rangers pause between tasks. The air was warm, but not heavy. The sky bore the faintest blush of coming dusk, a long smear of muted orange fading into pale ash. Grasshoppers ticked in the scrub, and a single moth circled the camp's outer lantern before vanishing into the dark. The calf hadn't stood. He had managed to shift his body once, inching his back legs beneath him in a restless attempt, but his front limbs had buckled before they could bear his weight. Now he lay curled again, head resting against the soil, trunk coiled lightly beneath his chin. His breathing remained shallow but steady. There was no panic in it, only patience, only fatigue. They had continued the care without pause. Hydration, small feedings, cloth soaked and pressed gently over his eyes. The vet had left earlier that day but promised to return by morning. Before departing, he'd said softly, "He's holding." But not forever. So they stayed close, watching for signs. A flick of the tail, a wrinkle near the eye. Anything that would hint at what the calf carried inside, not just the injury, but the deeper thing, the unspoken shape of his waiting. And then, just past the ridgeline, a sound broke the hush. It wasn't the wind. It didn't pass through the trees or bend the branches. It hung in place, low, resonant, and faintly rounded. A single call, not sharp, not searching, just present. It lingered, then faded. A few rangers froze. One stood slowly. "Did you hear that?" No one answered, but they all had. The calf stirred. His eyes opened, not all the way, but enough to catch the dark shifting above him. His ears lifted just slightly. Then came a second sound, longer this time, clearer, deeper, like age pressed into breath. And then the calf moved, not fast, not in panic. He simply shifted, slowly, until his front legs unfolded beneath him again. His body trembled as he pushed against the ground, struggling to raise his chest. His trunk unfurled, his head lifted. From him came a weak trumpet, short, airy, broken at the end. The call from the trees did not return. But the air had changed. The rangers said nothing. They didn't need to. The moment had taken over. One of them stepped back instinctively, giving him more space. Another moved to loosen the fence's far corner, just in case. The calf pulled his body forward an inch, then stopped. Not to collapse, but to listen. His ears twitched again. His head turned slightly toward the east ridge where the tree line thickened. He made no sound now, just stayed still, as if the soil beneath him carried messages too soft for humans to hear. Minutes passed. The wind came up again, a dry breeze lifting the outer leaves, shifting dust across the clearing. Then, faint as breath, another call drifted in. Shorter this time, but unmistakable. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a cry, it was a statement. "I am here." The calf gave another trumpet, louder now, not in strength, but in shape, a fuller tone, as if something inside him had opened again. He tried once more to rise, his limbs trembling with effort. The rangers moved toward him, but stopped short. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't falling. He was trying, choosing. And then his body gave out. He eased back to the ground in slow surrender, breath coming in small bursts. Still, his eyes stayed open. One ranger crouched beside him, placing a palm lightly on his side. "Someone called you," she said. "I heard it, too." The rest of the evening passed in silence. The calls did not return, but the air held a memory. Even the insects seemed to move differently. The fence creaked once in the wind, then stilled again. That night, the calf didn't sleep right away. He stayed half-curled, eyes drifting but never fully closed. His trunk lifted now and then toward the air, tasting something just beyond reach. The scent of distance, the memory of another. And far beyond the ridge, where the trees bent toward older paths, something waited. The sky was still dark when the first light shifted behind the eastern ridge. A pale thread of gray stretched across the horizon, slow and tentative, like breath returning to a sleeping mouth. The air was cool, not sharp, and the camp stirred only in small ways. The soft clink of metal against basin, a blanket folded back, a gate latch checked for the third time. No one had spoken yet. They were waiting. The calf had not slept through the night. He'd dozed, his trunk twitching in short motions, ears flicking once every few minutes, but his eyes kept drifting open, as if some part of him refused to surrender to rest. Even now, just before dawn, he lay facing east, head up, breath shallow, gaze fixed on the shadows where brush met tree. And then it happened. From the far edge of the clearing, near the broken part of the low fence line, a shape emerged. Not loud, not sudden, just there, like a stone revealing itself as fog lifts. She was large, taller than most in her age group, but thin now. Her sides showed years of wear. One ear bore a clean tear near the edge, healed but permanent. Her left tusk was shorter, possibly broken in a river gorge long ago. Her steps were slow but sure, and her skin hung in dry folds across her flank. Dust coated her back in a layer, so even it looked intentional. She didn't make a sound. The rangers saw her from across the compound but did not approach. Not yet. One lifted binoculars, lowered them just as quickly, and whispered, "It's her." No one needed to ask who. She stood at the edge of the fence, still, unmoving. Her head tilted slightly toward the camp, ears relaxed, trunk hanging loosely before curling once at the tip. Her eyes scanned the open space ahead, not searching, not alert, just watching. The calf did not move at first. He blinked. Once, twice, then shifted one leg beneath him. His trunk rose half an inch from the ground, trembled, then dropped again. Then she made a single step forward, slow, heavy, deliberate. Not closing distance, just enough to say, "I'm here." The calf responded in the smallest of ways. A grunt, barely audible, more breath than sound. He tried to rise, front legs straining. His shoulder gave out. He slumped forward. Dust rose and settled. The female held her ground. One ranger, kneeling beside the calf, whispered, "She's not going to come closer." The others understood. She was waiting, not out of fear, not because of the humans. She had drawn a line in the dust, and now the calf had to cross it, on his own. For 10 long minutes, nothing changed. Then, with a slow creak of muscle and bone, the calf tried again. One leg, then another. His trunk lifted off the ground and stayed lifted. He braced, rocked forward. His front legs straightened first, wobbling. Then came the back. One slipped. He grunted, adjusted, and held. He was standing. The rangers did not move. One covered her mouth. Another pressed their hand to their chest without realizing it. They knew better than to cheer. This was not their moment. The calf took a step. It was clumsy. He nearly fell, but his foot landed. Then another. The second was steadier. His trunk curled slightly, pointing toward her. She did not move. The third step came quicker. He was halfway across the clearing now, not walking in a straight line, but forward, determined, as if pulled by something older than memory. She made a low sound. The first. A breathy rumble, deep in her chest, rolling out like distant thunder. The calf froze. His trunk lifted, wavered, and echoed back a thin reply. Not full strength, but clear. She waited. 2 more steps. His head bobbed with effort, body trembling again, but the dust held beneath him. The air stayed still. And then they met. No rush, no cry. Just a long, quiet touch. Her trunk sliding slowly along his face, across his head, behind his ears. He pressed into her chest, legs bending slightly, body folding into the curve of her shoulder. She breathed against him. Not fast, not loud, just enough to say, "I waited too." For a long time, neither moved. The sun lifted behind them now, casting long shadows across the clearing. Dust swirled at their feet. The torn-eared female shifted once to shield his body from the breeze. One ranger wiped a hand down her face and whispered, "She never came close until now." The reunion was not dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was slow, steady, earned, a meeting built not on distance traveled, but on time endured. They stood together in silence, and though the camp remained still, every eye held the same understanding. He had not been abandoned. He had been lost, and she had come. By the time the sun touched the tops of the brush again, the air had warmed just enough to soften the dust beneath their feet. Not enough to lift it, just enough that each step left a clearer imprint. The calf stood close to her side now, his body leaning ever so slightly against hers, as if remembering how to do so. Not for balance, he could stand on his own now, but for something else, for rhythm, for belonging. She had stayed with him through the night. After their trunks touched and breath was shared, she had not turned away. She had remained inside the loose rope perimeter the rangers had gently extended, resting on her forelegs while he shifted between sleep and waking. Once, just before dawn, she'd risen again and stood over him, shielding him from the wind that rolled down the east slope. She never looked at the humans. She never needed to. Now, as the heat began to gather again, she touched her trunk to the ground once, then turned, her head slightly toward the bushland. It was time. The rangers understood without a word. One by one, they stepped back. The rope line that circled the camp's east gate, a simple measure of distance, never a barrier, was unclipped in silence and lowered until it touched the earth like an unspooled thread. No one gave a signal. No one instructed. They just waited. The mother stepped forward first, one large foot pressing softly into the dust, her shoulder rising and settling with the motion. The calf hesitated for a moment, blinking against the sun, then followed. His steps were shorter, uneven, but certain. They passed through the open space where the rope had been. Not quickly, not slowly, just moving, as if the path had always existed. No ranger reached out. No one whispered this time. There was no need. They watched the pair cross the clearing, the older female with her deliberate, worn gait, the calf beside her with his tail swinging in small arcs. When she slowed, he slowed. When she paused to scent the air, he paused too. They were learning each other again. At the edge of the scrub, where thornbrush met yellow grass, she stopped, turned slightly, lifted her head. The calf pressed into her flank. She reached her trunk over his back and let it rest there for one long, motionless breath. Then they walked on, past the low grass, past the broken limb that had fallen weeks before the calf arrived, past the place where the well path curved out of view, and then they were gone, swallowed gently by the brush, the way wind slips behind a hill. The rangers didn't move for a long time. One of them, the woman who had first knelt with the soaked cloth, stepped forward and knelt again, this time where the calf had rested those first few hours. She touched the dust, still marked by his shape, and let her fingers press lightly into the print. "He came here on his own," she said, "but he didn't leave alone." There were no photographs, no drones, no tracking tags. The story would be remembered only through the lines in the dirt, the water bowls half full, and the quiet shared that morning. That was enough. As the sun rose higher, a breeze passed over the clearing, lifting a thin veil of dust from the ground. It curled briefly in the shape of their prints, small and large, before smoothing into the earth again. The camp returned to its rhythm. But something lingered in the silence. Not absence, not loss, just memory. The kind that doesn't fade with days, or distance, or heat. It remains in the dust, in the morning light, in the way the grass bends after footsteps pass, and in the space just beyond the rope line, where a calf once stood waiting for something he couldn't name, and where a mother came walking, slow and scarred, because she could still hear the sound of him in the trees.